Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The arrival of the exiled princess ***. It was a quiet night in the remote wilderness of the Colorado Rockies, the skies clear, and the stars shining brightly over the still expanse. The peace of the land was disturbed only by the whisper of the wind and the occasional chirping of insects. But beneath the earth, hidden deep in an underground bunker, the story of an alien visitor, an exiled princess, was about to unfold. The alien spacecraft had crashed weeks ago, its wreckage hidden far from prying eyes. The crew of the spaceship was dead except for one, Arina, the last of the aristocratic Zivrians. She was a stunning creature, both terrifying and captivating. Her beauty was beyond human comprehension, skin like pale moonlight that shimmered with an ethereal glow, eyes a striking shade of violet that seemed to pierce the soul, and long flowing silver hair that cascaded down her back in waves of light. Her physique, lean yet curvaceous, held the elegance of a queen. But now, despite her regal nature, Arina was imprisoned. The Zivrians were an advanced alien species known for their intelligence, strength, and long lifespan. They hailed from a distant star system far beyond the Milky Way. But not all Zivrians were treated equally. Arina, a princess once adored by her people, had been banished to Earth after a failed coup against the ruling council. She had been abandoned, her craft sent into the unknown void. The ship's landing on Earth had been a catastrophic accident, and she had survived, barely. Now she lay shackled in a sterile, cold cell, the walls echoing with the faint hum of technology far more advanced than human capabilities. Her captors were not human. They were a race of brutish, lizard-like aliens who had taken advantage of Earth's isolation to establish an underground network. They were the Vaxians, merciless conquerors who viewed other species as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. And they had a specific interest in Arina. Their leader, a tall, scaly creature named Vrail, stood over her cell, staring at her with cold, reptilian eyes. His deep, guttural voice echoed in the small room as he sneered at the princess. "You Zivrians think you're superior to us," he mocked, his clawed fingers tapping against the glass. "But here you're nothing." Arina remained silent, her face a mask of defiance. She had learned long ago that resistance would only make her captors more cruel. The Vaxians had kept her alive only to torment her, to extract any knowledge she had of the Zivrian fleet's advanced technology. The torture had been endless, physical, mental, and emotional, and yet she endured. She had nothing left to lose. As the days turned into weeks, the Vaxians grew more impatient. Arina could feel their eyes on her constantly, waiting for the breaking point, the moment she would crack and give them the secrets they sought. But she was more than just a prisoner. She was a survivor. Then one night something shifted in the air. It was a feeling she had longed for, a slight change in the atmosphere, a stirring of energy. It was faint, barely perceptible, but it was there. Something had changed. The Vaxians were distracted, arguing among themselves in their native tongue, unaware that something was coming. A deep rumble shook the ground, the lights flickering in the underground base. Arina's violet eyes narrowed, her senses tingling with a strange, unfamiliar energy. She could feel it, humans were approaching. And not just any humans. At the same moment, several miles away, in a hidden military facility not far from the crash site, a team of elite soldiers was preparing for a mission unlike any they had faced before. They had been briefed only hours earlier. An unidentified alien presence on Earth, hostile to humans and potentially to every other species it encountered. Led by Captain Jacob Daniels, the team consisted of men and women from the best Special Forces units. They had undergone countless hours of training for this moment, but nothing could have prepared them for the situation that lay ahead. The data they had received was sparse, and the threat level was uncertain. But what was clear was that the alien entity in question had been held captive by the Vaxians, and now the humans had a chance to save her. "Arina," Captain Daniels said to his team, his voice steady. "We don't know if she's friendly, but we have a mission. Secure the princess, extract her, and get her out of there. Any questions?" One of the soldiers, Sergeant Lucy Hayes, shook her head. "How do we know we're not walking into a trap?" "We don't," Captain Daniels replied. "But we don't have a choice. The Vaxians have been taking humans for experiments. They're dangerous and we're going to neutralize them." Hayes clenched her fists, her mind already calculating the risks. "Understood, sir." The team moved into position, their movements precise and fluid. They were well equipped with cutting-edge military technology, designed to combat extraterrestrial threats. As they approached the entrance to the Vaxian base, the sense of tension thickened in the air. This was no ordinary mission. This was their first direct encounter with an alien species, and the stakes could not have been higher. Inside the Vaxian base, Arina could sense it. The energy was intensifying. She could hear faint footsteps approaching her cell. The Vaxians were on high alert, but it was not their presence that made her pulse quicken. It was the humans, their scent, the vibrations in the air, and most of all, the quiet certainty that they were coming for her. Arina's heart began to race as she strained against the shackles that held her. She was weak, battered, but still alive. And for the first time in weeks, hope flickered within her. The door to her cell hissed open, and a beam of bright light filled the room. There, standing in the doorway, were the humans, armed, determined, and filled with purpose. "Princess Arina," Captain Daniels said, his voice calm but urgent. "We're here to rescue you." Arina blinked, the words unfamiliar yet undeniably hopeful. Could these humans truly be her saviors? She had no choice but to trust them. As the soldiers moved toward her, the Vaxians erupted into chaos, and the sound of blaster fire filled the air. The battle for Arina's freedom had just begun. The fight for freedom ***. The blaster fire echoed through the underground tunnels of the Vaxian base, sharp and deadly. Arina's heart raced as Captain Daniels and his team stormed into her cell, guns raised, their movements calculated and professional. The team had arrived just in time, but they weren't the only ones aware of the shift in the air. The Vaxians, a ruthless species used to terrorizing other life forms, were quick to react. Vrail, the Vaxian leader, bellowed orders to his troops in their guttural language. "Don't let them take her. Kill them all." His voice cracked like the snap of a whip, and the sound of his command sent a ripple of panic through the base. Vaxian warriors, some of them towering over 6 feet tall, charged down the hallways, their reptilian eyes glowing with fury. Arina, weak and confined to her restraints, watched as the humans advanced with military precision. Their movements were swift and decisive, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around them. Captain Daniels, his face set in grim determination, stepped forward and knelt by her side, his gaze flicking over the shackles that bound her. "We're going to get you out of here," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Just hold on." Arina didn't respond, her chest tight with the combination of exhaustion and growing hope. These humans, though vastly different from the Zivrians, were offering her something that had seemed impossible only moments before. A way out. The sight of them standing between her and the Vaxians, a shield against her tormentors, brought an overwhelming sense of gratitude, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Before she could fully process the implications of her situation, the sound of heavy footsteps approached. Vrail was coming. Captain Daniels didn't hesitate. With a quick signal, he motioned for his team to clear the room. The soldiers spread out, guns trained on the door, ready for the inevitable onslaught. Arina's pulse quickened as the Vaxians closed in. The door to her cell burst open with a deafening roar, revealing the first wave of Vaxian soldiers. 7 of them, clad in armored suits that glinted in the dim light. They were monstrous, their reptilian features distorted in anger, and their claws gleamed with deadly intent. The human soldiers opened fire immediately, a series of controlled bursts that cut down 2 Vaxians in a matter of seconds. "Move!" Captain Daniels shouted, pulling Arina toward the back of the cell. "Stay low." Arina's legs, still weak from the weeks of captivity, nearly gave way beneath her. But before she could collapse, Sergeant Hayes, one of the soldiers closest to her, caught her, lifting her with surprising strength. "We've got you, Princess," Hayes said, her tone firm as she supported Arina's frail form. Arina's violet eyes locked with hers, filled with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. She had no way of knowing if she could trust these humans completely, but for the first time she felt like she might have a chance. A chance to escape, to return home, to reclaim her life. But she also understood that this wasn't just about her freedom, it was about survival. And the Vaxians wouldn't let her go without a fight. The remaining Vaxians began to fire back, their plasma weapons sending streaks of light through the air. One of the soldiers, Private Kenji, was struck in the shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and kept fighting, returning fire while his teammate, Corporal Riley, provided cover. "Suppressing fire," Riley yelled, and Kenji immediately dropped to the floor behind the nearest cover, allowing the others to advance. Vrail, towering over his soldiers, pushed through the carnage with a snarl on his face. His thick, scaled hide was impervious to most weaponry, but his rage was his greatest weapon. As his soldiers engaged the humans, Vrail's eyes locked onto Arina, and his lip curled in fury. "She is mine," he roared, his voice a deep, guttural growl. "No one escapes me." Arina felt a surge of dread as she saw him advance, his massive claws extended like daggers, his gaze fixed on her. He was faster than he appeared, and his presence was suffocating, a reminder of the many torments she had suffered under his cruel hands. Her body trembled in fear, but she forced herself to stand tall. She was no longer the prisoner. She was no longer powerless. Before Vrail could reach her, Captain Daniel stepped into his path, his rifle raised. "Stay back," he commanded, but Vrail only laughed, a dark, menacing sound. "You think you can stop me, human?" Vrail hissed. "I have torn civilizations apart for sport. You are nothing." Arina's eyes flicked to the side, where Sergeant Hayes was ushering the rest of the team down the corridor. The humans were moving quickly, but the Vaxians had them pinned down. The soldiers were in a tight spot, their weapons less effective against the alien armor. Time was running out. Suddenly, Arina's mind raced back to her Zivrian training. Her people had long mastered the arts of defense and combat, and though she had not been allowed to practice them in years, the knowledge was still there, deep within her. She could just tap into it. Without warning, Arina reached out with both hands, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. Her eyes began to glow a bright violet, and the air around her seemed to pulse with energy. In an instant, a force wave erupted from her, knocking Vrail back several feet and sending the nearest Vaxian soldiers flying across the room. The humans watched in awe as Arina stood tall, her presence now radiant with power. The shackles fell from her wrists with a sharp clang as the energy coursed through her. Vrail, recovering from the shockwave, snarled, but he hesitated. For the first time he seemed uncertain. "Impossible," Vrail growled. "She is just a princess, a weak exile." But Arina was no longer just a princess. She was a force to be reckoned with. The energy in the room shifted, the air thick with the weight of her newfound power. "I am no longer your prisoner," Arina said, her voice firm and commanding, echoing with authority. Captain Daniels, eyes wide with disbelief, turned to his team. "We have her. Move out, now." Arina, now fully free of her restraints, stepped forward, her body glowing with a strange light. Her newfound power was like nothing she had ever felt before, and for the first time since her capture she felt truly alive. She could see the fear in the eyes of the Vaxians, and it was sweet. Vrail was furious, but the battle was far from over. The fight for Arina's freedom had reached a pivotal moment, and the humans had a chance to escape, but only if they could hold their ground. Escape and betrayal ****. The battle raged on in the dimly lit corridors of the Vaxian underground base. Gunfire echoed through the chambers, the crackling sound of plasma blasts filling the air. Arina stood at the center of the chaos, her body now radiant with violet energy, her eyes glowing with an intensity that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the room. The soldiers, for the first time, watched in awe as she unleashed the full extent of her power. Vrail, recovering from the shockwave, bellowed in frustration. He knew that the humans had breached the core of his stronghold, but it was Arina who had truly become the key to his downfall. She had betrayed her own people when she fled their empire, and now, in a cruel twist of fate, she was using powers that even he could not fully comprehend. His massive, armored form lumbered forward, his claws extended like deadly weapons, his anger threatening to consume him. But Captain Daniels and his team weren't backing down. They had come too far, fought too hard, and now they had to get Arina out alive. "Cover the exit," Captain Daniels shouted, his voice firm and commanding. His eyes locked on Arina, who was still radiating with her newfound strength. "We need to move now?" Arina nodded, her heart racing. She had felt her energy surge in a way she hadn't in years, but it was also draining her. The strain of using her abilities that were foreign to her in this new form, was beginning to take its toll. She felt the power coursing through her, but it was like a fire that was burning too brightly, too quickly. If they didn't escape soon, she wouldn't be able to keep the Vaxians at bay. The soldiers formed a tight perimeter around her as they moved swiftly through the base's winding corridors. Sergeant Hayes led the way, her eyes scanning every corner, every potential hiding spot where more Vaxians could be waiting. The rest of the team moved in sync, covering their backs and making sure nothing caught them off guard. Arina's mind raced as they advanced. She was still grappling with the overwhelming surge of power that had awakened inside her. This was not just energy, it was a gift but also a curse. She had never fully understood the depth of her people's abilities until now. Her exile had robbed her of her training, and she was now trying to catch up with the raw force she had access to. As they turned a corner, she stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her for a moment. Hayes caught her again, steadying her as the team continued to advance. "You okay?" Hayes asked, her voice low but filled with concern. Arina gritted her teeth, pushing herself to stand. I will be. Ahead, the main exit was in sight. The tunnel opened up to the surface, a small, nondescript clearing deep in the mountains. But the path was not clear. More Vaxian soldiers had gathered at the entrance, barricading the exit with their advanced weaponry. A towering figure stood among them, Vrail, his eyes locked on Arina with a mixture of fury and disbelief. You will not leave, Vrail spat, his voice venomous. I will end you, and then your pathetic human saviors will follow. Arina's pulse quickened, her heart racing with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She could feel the weight of his words, the crushing pressure of his malice. But now she was no longer a victim of fate. She was no longer the princess exiled to a foreign world. She was a warrior, standing on the precipice of her freedom, and the Vaxians would not take that from her. With a guttural growl, Vrail lunged forward, his claws swiping through the air with lightning speed. Arina barely had time to react before she raised her hands, summoning the energy inside her. A blast of violet light shot forward, colliding with Vrail's body, sending him crashing into the wall behind him. His armored form buckled under the force of the impact, but he quickly regained his footing. You cannot defeat me? Vrail roared, his voice shaking the walls around them. I will tear you apart. The soldiers opened fire, their guns spitting deadly rounds toward the advancing Vaxians. But the Vaxian armor was too thick and their weapons too powerful. It was clear that the humans were outmatched in sheer numbers and strength. The team fired relentlessly, but the Vaxians continued to press forward, determined to recapture their prize. Captain? Hayes shouted, her voice strained. We can't hold them off much longer. Daniels glanced around, calculating their options. The exit was still a few yards away, but they were running out of time. The Vaxians were closing in and the way forward was blocked. Fall back. Daniels ordered, his voice sharp. Get to the tunnel. But just as they began to retreat, a sudden, unexpected figure emerged from the shadows. The last person they expected to see. Lieutenant Mark Graves, one of their own, stepped out into the open, a grim look on his face. Lieutenant? Daniels asked, his voice filled with confusion. What the hell are you doing? Graves didn't answer. Instead, he raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Daniels. For a split second, the team froze, their minds trying to process what was happening. Graves, a trusted member of the team, was pointing his gun at them. What the hell is this? Sergeant Hayes demanded, her voice hard as she leveled her rifle at him. Graves' face was impassive, his eyes cold. You don't understand, he said, his voice distant. The mission was never about rescuing her. It was about keeping her contained. The shock hit like a blow to the chest. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether they had heard him correctly. You're working with the Vaxians? Daniels asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Graves gave a small, humorless smile. Not exactly. But I was sent here by a different faction. One that believes in controlling her powers, not setting her free. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Arina, still reeling from the shock of seeing one of her rescuers betray them, could hardly comprehend what was happening. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of Graves' words. It was clear now that the humans had their own agenda, and she had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. You've been lying to us this whole time, Captain Daniels said, his voice low and dangerous. Why, Graves? Because you don't understand the bigger picture, Graves replied, his voice almost pitying. Arina's power isn't just a threat to the Vaxians, it's a threat to humanity itself. If she's left unchecked, she'll destroy everything. I'm doing what needs to be done. In that moment, Arina knew she had made a grave mistake. She had trusted these humans, allowed herself to believe that they were her salvation. But the truth was far more complicated. Betrayal hung in the air, and as Graves' weapon clicked to life, she knew that their escape was slipping away, replaced by an even darker future. Vrail's voice boomed from the back, his eyes now narrowing in recognition. Take her back, Graves, he snarled. The princess belongs to us. With no time to lose, Arina's mind snapped into action. If she was to survive this, she would have to fight once again, but this time, it would be for more than just her freedom. It would be for humanity itself. The heart of betrayal ***. The air in the tunnel was thick with tension, the sound of crackling weapons and the low hum of the underground base echoing around them. Arina stood at the center of the conflict, her mind racing with disbelief. Graves, one of the humans who had come to rescue her, had just revealed his true allegiance. He was working with a faction that sought to control her, not free her. And now, as the Vaxian leader, Vrail, ordered him to return her to their custody, everything that Arina had hoped for began to crumble. Arina's violet eyes flashed with a combination of anger and fear. The betrayal hurt, but it was not the first time she had been let down by those she thought she could trust. The Zivrian people had abandoned her, and now the humans, who had once seemed like her only chance, were part of a larger conspiracy. But the one thing Arina could not afford was fear. She had been cast aside before, but she would not be cast aside again. She had power now, power she hadn't fully understood until moments ago. And now that power would be her weapon. Graves' weapon was trained on Captain Daniels and his team, the barrel of his rifle gleaming with deadly precision. Arina's mind raced, trying to process the chaos around her. The humans, her supposed allies, were now divided. Graves had made it clear that he was willing to use force to capture her, and she was just as determined not to return to the clutches of the Vaxians. Graves, what the hell are you doing? Captain Daniels' voice was sharp, filled with disbelief. His eyes flicked between Graves and the Vaxians, his stance tense as he calculated the next move. We trusted you. Why are you working with them? Graves didn't flinch. His eyes, once filled with camaraderie, were now cold and calculating. You were never meant to succeed in this mission. The Vaxians aren't the real threat. Arina is. You were all pawns in a much larger game. His voice was low, almost regretful. I didn't want it to be this way, but you wouldn't understand. Captain Daniels' jaw tightened. So, you're willing to betray your own team to control her? You're a coward, Graves? The words hit hard, but Graves didn't seem to care. He took a step back, aiming the barrel of his rifle at Daniels' head. I'm not the one betraying anyone, he said coldly. You don't know the stakes. The Zivrians left her to die, but we can't let her roam free. The power inside her, if we don't control it, will destroy everything. I'm doing what I have to do. For humanity's future. Arina's heart pounded in her chest, her breathing shallow as she felt the weight of the conversation. She could feel the power inside her building, a seething, pulsing energy that threatened to burst forth again. Graves was wrong, she wasn't a weapon to be controlled. She was a survivor, and her freedom wasn't something that anyone could claim for themselves. But the more she focused on the power within her, the more she realized that it was unstable. The emotions swirling inside her, betrayal, fear, and fury, were only fueling the energy, making it grow stronger and more volatile. She had never been trained to harness it, and now it was threatening to consume her. If she wasn't careful, she could unintentionally cause destruction on a scale far beyond her control. Suddenly, a crackling voice echoed through the comm system, cutting through the tension. Graves, this is Commander Renfield. Status report now. Graves' grip on his rifle tightened, but he didn't lower it. Everything's fine, Commander, he replied, his voice strained. We're in position. I have her under control. Renfield's voice crackled through the speakers again, this time more insistent. I said status report, Graves. Are you sure you have control of the situation? I'm not getting a good read on your location. Something's off. Graves hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Arina for a moment. It was a small, almost imperceptible shift, but she caught it. The commander's tone was different, sharper, more suspicious. Arina didn't have time to figure out the details, but one thing was clear. Graves was losing his grip on the situation. You'll get the intel when the mission is complete, Graves said, his voice tight. I'll bring her to you. We're still moving forward. Commander Renfield's response was clipped. Keep me updated. And remember, Graves, failure is not an option. Graves turned off the comms, his eyes narrowing at Arina. You don't understand, do you? He said, his voice low and threatening. There is no escape for you. You belong to us. Arina's eyes hardened, her hands trembling at her sides. She had spent years fleeing from those who sought to control her, and now, here she was, trapped again, betrayed by the very humans she had trusted to save her. But she was not powerless. She had power inside her, and she would fight to the death to protect it. You're wrong, Arina said, her voice unwavering despite the chaos swirling inside her. I don't belong to anyone. The air around her seemed to pulse with energy as she focused all of her remaining strength on her core, summoning the violet energy that had surged within her earlier. She could feel it building, ready to explode. But this time she would control it. She had to. Graves took another step forward, his weapon still aimed at Captain Daniels. Move, Daniels. Now. Arina acted without thinking. She reached out with both hands, her fingers crackling with power, and in a flash of violet light, she thrust her hands forward. A wave of force erupted from her body, pushing Graves backward with a violent surge of energy. The force of the blast was enough to knock him off his feet, sending him crashing into a wall several feet away. His rifle flew from his grasp as he struggled to regain his balance. For a moment the room fell into stunned silence. The soldiers watched in awe, their jaws hanging open as they witnessed the raw, unrestrained power emanating from Arina. She was no longer the fragile, weakened princess. She was a force to be reckoned with. Graves, dazed but not defeated, struggled to his feet. "You," he started, his voice filled with fury, but Arina wasn't done. She raised her hands again, and this time the energy around her exploded in a wave of force that shook the walls of the tunnel. The Vaxian soldiers, who had been regrouping at the entrance, were caught off guard as they were sent sprawling across the floor, their bodies crashing into the walls. Vrail's bellow of rage filled the space, but even he was temporarily thrown off balance by the sheer power of Arina's attack. "Get out of here!" Captain Daniels shouted, snapping out of his initial shock. He motioned for his team to move toward the exit, but his eyes remained locked on Graves, who was now crawling toward his rifle, desperation in his movements. Arina stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Graves, who was still trying to regain control of the situation. "You were wrong, Graves," she said coldly. "And now you will face the consequences." The ground beneath their feet trembled as Arina unleashed another burst of energy, this time directed at the tunnel's support beams. The walls cracked and groaned under the strain, and dust began to fall from the ceiling as the tunnel started to collapse. The humans had no time to react. "Run!" Arina shouted. "Now?" Captain Daniels turned on his heel, his team following close behind. Graves, still struggling to recover, glanced over his shoulder at Arina, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. But it was too late. The tunnel was collapsing and the only way out was forward. Arina was free. A new dawn ****. The tunnel was collapsing around them, the roar of falling rocks and the shaking earth creating a symphony of chaos. Dust choked the air, filling Arina's lungs as she sprinted ahead, her heart pounding. She could hear the frantic footsteps of Captain Daniels and his team behind her, their weapons firing sporadically as they struggled to hold off the Vaxians, but she knew they would be no match for the full force of the enemy. The cave-in was their only chance. "Keep moving," Captain Daniels barked, his voice urgent as the rumble of destruction grew louder behind them. "We don't have much time." Arina could feel the energy surging within her, but it was a double-edged sword. The raw power she wielded was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Uncontrollable and overwhelming. Every blast of energy she released made her feel more fragmented, more out of touch with her own sense of self. But as the walls of the tunnel continued to fall around them, the instinct to survive pushed aside everything else. She had to get out. They all had to get out. As they rounded a final bend in the tunnel, a blast of heat and light exploded behind them. A massive rock, too large to avoid, came crashing down, forcing them to dive forward. Arina barely avoided being crushed, her pulse racing as she tumbled onto the rough ground. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes scanning for any signs of the enemy. "We're almost there," Sergeant Hayes called, pulling Arina up by the arm. "The exit's ahead. Just a little further." The group surged forward once again, their bodies slick with sweat, their movements desperate. The hum of alien machinery was growing louder as they neared the exit, and Arina could see the light of the outside world just beyond the final bend. But the joy of nearing freedom was short-lived. As they emerged from the dark tunnel into the open air, a sharp, cold wind hit them, and the sight of the Vaxian ships waiting in the clearing froze them in their tracks. There was no escape now. The sky was filled with their sleek, menacing ships, their weapon turrets aimed directly at the fleeing humans. A handful of Vaxian soldiers stood ready at the perimeter, their alien weapons poised to strike. "You're too late," Vrail's voice boomed across the clearing, and the ground seemed to vibrate as the massive Vaxian leader approached them. His towering form was covered in spiked armor, his eyes glowing with fury as he approached Arina. "You think you can escape me? You are mine, Arina. And you will be brought back, alive or dead." Arina's mind raced, her body tensing in preparation for the inevitable conflict. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she struggled to suppress the outpouring of power that threatened to erupt once more. She knew they couldn't fight Vrail's full force, he was far too powerful. But something inside her had shifted in the tunnel, something deeper than the surge of energy she had felt earlier. It wasn't just her power that could get them out. It was her will. "I'm not yours," Arina said, her voice steady as she locked eyes with Vrail. "I belong to no one." Vrail's lip curled into a snarl, but before he could respond, a loud explosion echoed through the clearing, shaking the ground beneath them. The Vaxian soldiers stumbled, disoriented by the shockwave. A second blast followed, and then another as a group of human fighters emerged from the treeline, guns blazing. A fresh wave of hope surged through Arina as the sound of gunfire rang in the air. She could see the silhouettes of reinforcements, more humans, charging toward the clearing, their weapons cutting down the Vaxians with unyielding precision. "Hold your ground," Captain Daniels shouted, his voice a beacon of authority amid the chaos. "Push them back." Arina didn't wait for further orders. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when she could finally break free from the chains that had bound her for so long. The power inside her surged again more intensely than before. She could feel it, like a well of strength, ancient and unyielding, that had been lying dormant within her for years. Without thinking, she extended her arms toward the sky, drawing the energy around her into a single point. The air seemed to crackle with electricity as her body shimmered with violet light. Vrail roared in defiance, but Arina was beyond fear now. Her mind focused on a single goal: freedom. With a force that could level entire cities, Arina unleashed her power. A massive wave of violet energy exploded from her hands, slamming into Vrail with the intensity of 1,000 storms. The Vaxian leader staggered back, his armored form crumpling under the force of the blast. His soldiers around him were thrown backward, their bodies flung across the clearing like ragdolls. The sky itself seemed to shudder with the magnitude of her power. The Vaxian ships hovering above the clearing trembled as they were buffeted by the shockwave. Arina felt the power inside her burn brightly, but it was no longer uncontrolled. She was no longer the frightened, broken princess. She was the storm itself. For a moment, everything was still. The sound of battle had ceased, and the battlefield was silent. The Vaxians, once so confident in their strength, were now reeling from the unexpected force that had leveled their ranks. Their ships were damaged, their ground forces decimated. Arina stood, chest heaving as she surveyed the scene. Her body felt like it was on fire, the raw energy coursing through her veins, but she was alive. They were alive. And for the first time in her life she was in control. A soft voice broke through the tension. "Arina," Captain Daniels said, his voice filled with awe as he approached her. That was incredible." Arina turned to face him, her eyes still glowing with the aftermath of her power. "I've never felt anything like that," she said quietly, her voice laced with both wonder and exhaustion. "I didn't know what I was capable of." "You've got more inside you than you realize," Daniels said, his eyes locking with hers. "But now is not the time to celebrate. We need to move. The Vaxians won't stay down for long." Arina nodded, her mind already shifting into survival mode. She could feel the tension in the air as the remaining Vaxians regrouped, their leader still alive though barely. His enraged roar echoed across the clearing, but Vrail was no longer the immediate threat. "We're not safe yet," Sergeant Hayes added, her voice tense as she scanned the sky. "More ships are coming. We need to go, now." Arina glanced up at the approaching ships, the ominous shadow of Vaxian reinforcements descending from the clouds. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. But for the first time in years, Arina was ready to face it. "We've got a lot of fighting left to do," she said, her voice resolute. "But I'm not running anymore." With a final defiant look at the damaged Vaxian forces, Arina turned and began to lead the charge. The humans, no longer mere rescuers, were now her allies, her partners in this fight for freedom. And as the sun began to rise over the battlefield, Arina knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of a new dawn. The tide turns ***. The winds howled through the battlefield as the remaining Vaxian ships circled above, their ominous silhouettes darkening the skies. The survivors of the battle, both humans and Arina's newfound allies, were momentarily frozen in the uneasy silence that followed her overwhelming display of power. The once confident alien invaders were stunned, but it was clear from their regrouping that the fight was far from over. Arina felt the raw power within her, still flickering beneath her skin, urging her to do more, but she forced herself to steady her breathing. The blast she had just unleashed had drained her more than she had expected. It was as if the energy, while powerful, had taken something vital from her, her sense of self, perhaps. But she would not succumb to it now. There was too much at stake. Captain Daniels stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon, his hand resting on his weapon as the remnants of their team gathered around. "We need to get out of here. Now. Vrail's still alive and we've only delayed the inevitable," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Arina nodded, feeling the weight of his words. They couldn't afford to wait. The Vaxians were still a formidable force, and their retaliation would be swift and unforgiving. They needed to move before Vrail could regroup and unleash his full fury. "Where's our extraction point?" Arina asked, turning to Sergeant Hayes, who was already scanning the area for escape routes. "We've got a transport coming in from the north," Hayes replied, her voice sharp as she glanced at the swirling skies. "But we're going to have to move fast. We'll be walking into a hornet's nest if we don't get a head start." Arina felt a pang of guilt in her chest. She had never intended for these humans to become embroiled in such a dangerous conflict. She had only wanted to escape the torment of the Vaxians, to regain her freedom. But now she was a part of something much larger. They were in this together, and she would not let them down. "We move out now," Arina said, her voice unwavering. "And we make sure they don't follow us." The team set out in the direction Hayes had indicated, moving quickly through the dense forest that bordered the clearing. The sounds of distant explosions and gunfire echoed behind them, the aftermath of the battle still rippling through the air. Every step felt heavy, the weight of the Vaxian pursuit bearing down on them. Arina could sense it. Their eyes were upon them, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Keep your heads down," Captain Daniels ordered, his tone hard as they moved through the thick underbrush. "If we don't stay low, we'll be sitting ducks for the next attack." Arina couldn't help but wonder what had drawn her into this conflict in the first place. Had she been running from her past, from the cruelty of the Zivrians and the Vaxians? Or had she simply been trying to survive in a world that seemed intent on destroying her? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing. She would fight with everything she had to protect these people, to ensure they had a chance to live and breathe freely in a world that seemed to want to crush them all. After what felt like an eternity of moving in silence, the dense forest began to thin, and the distant hum of a ship's engines grew louder. The extraction point was close. Arina could feel her strength returning, the violet energy pulsing beneath her skin, but she knew better than to rely on it too much. She couldn't let her power consume her again, not if it meant losing control. "We're almost there," Sergeant Hayes said quietly, her eyes darting around the tree line. "The transport should be just ahead." Suddenly, a high-pitched whistle split the air, followed by the crackling sound of weapons charging. Arina's heart skipped a beat. They had been spotted. Vaxian forces. Captain Daniels shouted, his voice a warning to the group. "Take cover. We need to hold them off long enough to reach the transport." Arina's pulse quickened as the unmistakable whir of Vaxian energy blasts filled the air. The first volley of fire whizzed through the trees, narrowly missing them as the team scrambled for cover. Arina crouched low, her heart racing as she moved behind a large boulder. The Vaxians were closing in fast, their ships hovering just above the tree line, sending waves of energy down into the forest. "Focus fire on the lead ship," Captain Daniels ordered. "We take it down and we've got a fighting chance." Arina didn't hesitate. She could feel the energy bubbling inside her, almost desperate to be unleashed. She raised her hands, her fingers tingling with the familiar warmth of the violet power that had been her constant companion since her escape. The air around her vibrated with raw force as she focused all her concentration on the nearest Vaxian ship, which was hovering just above them, its weapons aimed directly at their position. With a deep breath, she thrust her hands forward, releasing the full force of her power. The blast of energy shot out like a jagged bolt of lightning, striking the lead Vaxian ship square in the center. The ship's hull buckled under the impact, sparks flying as it began to spiral out of control. A moment later, the ship exploded in a fiery burst, sending debris scattering across the clearing. The impact of her attack sent a shockwave through the forest, knocking several of the Vaxian soldiers off their feet. Arina could feel the burn of exhaustion beginning to settle into her bones, but she didn't stop. Her hands were still glowing with power as she aimed at another Vaxian ship, this one descending toward them, weapons primed to fire. Another blast of violet energy erupted from her hands, striking the ship mid-descent. The ship spun violently as its engines malfunctioned, and it plummeted into the trees below with a tremendous crash. The remaining Vaxian forces hesitated for a moment, their morale shaken by the unexpected ferocity of the humans and Arina's display of power. But it was clear that they weren't retreating. They had been sent to wipe out these survivors, and they weren't going to stop until the mission was completed. "Keep pushing," Captain Daniels shouted, urging the team forward. "The transport's just ahead. We can't let them slow us down now." Arina's heart hammered in her chest as the transport finally came into view. A sleek, black shuttle was hovering low to the ground, its door wide open, ready to take them to safety. But even as they rushed toward it, a final volley of Vaxian fire lit up the sky, and a burst of energy struck one of the transport's engines, sending it into a tailspin. The shuttle veered off course, tumbling toward the ground, and Arina's stomach dropped. She wasn't sure how much longer they could hold out. But just as all seemed lost, a voice crackled through her comms. "This is Commander Renfield. We've got you covered. Brace yourselves." In the distance, another fleet of human ships appeared, cutting through the skies like a swarm of locusts. Their weapons lit up the Vaxian forces, and the remaining Vaxian ships began to retreat under the onslaught. "Now's our chance," Sergeant Hayes shouted, pointing toward the crippled transport. "We move now." Without hesitation, Arina and the team broke into a sprint, racing toward the transport as the incoming fire intensified. Just as they reached the shuttle's ramp, the remaining Vaxians began to retreat, their ships retreating into the sky. The team piled into the transport, and the ramp slammed shut behind them. As the engines roared to life, Arina took one last look at the battlefield below, her chest rising and falling with the adrenaline of the fight. She had done it. They had done it. The shuttle soared into the sky, and as the earth receded beneath them, Arina knew that this was only the beginning of the fight. But for the first time in her life she felt hope. Together they had turned the tide. And now they would face whatever came next side by side. The dawn of a new era ***. The shuttle hummed steadily as it climbed higher into the sky, leaving Earth's atmosphere behind. Arina sat near the front, her fingers still tingling from the power she had unleashed in the battle. The violet glow had faded from her hands, but she could still feel its pulse deep within her, a constant presence. It was a part of her now, indelible and ever-growing. Around her, the crew of humans that had fought alongside her were silent, their faces grim but resolute. The atmosphere within the shuttle was heavy with exhaustion, but there was also a sense of something else, something she had never truly experienced before. Hope. As the shuttle sped toward their rendezvous point, the stars outside twinkling like distant beacons of possibility, Captain Daniels broke the silence. "Good work out there, everyone," he said, his voice steady despite the strain he must have been feeling. "We lost some good men today, but we made it out alive. That's what matters. And we've got Arina to thank for that." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Arina glanced at the captain, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and guilt. They had saved her from the clutches of the Vaxians, had fought beside her, and now she was the reason they had a chance to survive. But it was a responsibility she hadn't asked for. "It was all of us," Arina said quietly, her voice almost lost amid the hum of the engines. "We did it together. But we're not out of danger yet." Sergeant Hayes, who had been seated across from Arina, gave her a pointed look. "You're right. This is just the beginning. The Vaxians will regroup. They won't stop until they've hunted us down. But now," she paused, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips. "Now we know what they're up against." Arina nodded, her thoughts still lingering on the battle. It had been a brutal clash, one that had cost them dearly. The Vaxians were relentless, their power and technology vast, but for the first time in a long time, Arina had felt something shift within her. She wasn't just the helpless alien princess anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. And the humans, her new allies, were not as weak as the Vaxians had believed. A soft ping interrupted her thoughts, and the voice of Commander Renfield crackled over the comms, breaking through the static. "We've got a safe zone ready for you, Arina. Get some rest, you'll need it." Arina glanced up at the screen as the distant glow of a massive human vessel appeared in the distance, a sleek and imposing ship. Its silhouette loomed over them, a stark contrast to the chaotic battlefield they had just left behind. The sheer size of it was a testament to humanity's ingenuity, their resilience, and their refusal to be dominated by anyone. "We're almost there," Captain Daniels said, his tone softening as he gave Arina a reassuring nod. "You're safe now. We'll figure out the next move when we get to the station." Arina couldn't help but feel a pang of unease as the shuttle approached the large human vessel. They had won a battle, yes, but there was no telling what awaited them beyond this moment. The Vaxians were relentless and they wouldn't give up. She had seen the fear in their eyes before, but now she saw something else, a burning hatred, a desire to erase her from the face of the universe. The shuttle docked with the larger ship with a soft thud, and the ramp slowly descended. Arina stood, feeling the weight of her newfound role settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about leading a revolution. A revolution that could take down the Vaxians, and the other invaders who had long sought to enslave her people. As she stepped off the shuttle and onto the bustling deck of the human ship, she was greeted by a group of officers and engineers. They were all human and they all seemed to recognize her instantly. There was no fear in their eyes, no hesitation. They saw her for what she truly was, a leader, not a prisoner. "Welcome aboard, Princess Arina," one of the officers said with a salute. "We've been expecting you." Her heart fluttered at the title, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of everything that had happened. "But I'm not a princess anymore. I'm a fighter." The officer smiled. "And we're glad to have you fighting alongside us." The group of humans led her through the corridors of the ship, their faces a mix of curiosity and respect. Arina had never felt more out of place, or more at home. She wasn't royalty here, nor was she the alien princess they had come to rescue. She was simply one of them, fighting for a cause greater than herself. They arrived at the command center where Commander Renfield stood awaiting her. The tall, commanding officer nodded in greeting as she entered the room. "Good to see you, Arina. It's been a long road, but we've finally got you in a safe zone." Arina nodded, but her mind was still focused on the bigger picture. "I appreciate the shelter, but this war isn't over. The Vaxians won't rest until they have me back, and I know they're not the only threat we'll face." Renfield gave her a knowing look, a mix of empathy and determination in his eyes. "You're right. But we've got the resources now. We've got a plan. And we've got you." Arina stared out the large window behind him, watching the stars streak past as the ship moved through the darkness of space. She had been running from her past for so long, hiding from the Vaxians and their cruel grip on her. But now she was here. She was among humans who didn't see her as a prize or a weapon, but as a person who could make a difference. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted softly, the words almost escaping her before she realized they had been in her mind for so long. "I've never led anyone before. I've always been the one waiting to be rescued." "You've already led us," Commander Renfield said, his voice steady. "You've already shown us what it means to fight, to survive. And now we follow you." Arina felt the weight of those words settle on her, and for the first time in years she felt something shift inside her, a new resolve. The road ahead would not be easy, and the Vaxians would never give up their hunt. But she had found something stronger than fear. She had found a purpose. The room fell silent, and she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, waiting. Arina turned to face them, her heart steady, her mind clear. "We fight," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness, "not just for survival but for freedom. For the chance to live as we choose without fear of oppression or enslavement. We'll take the fight to the Vaxians and to anyone else who tries to take what's ours." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had been through, everything she had learned, and everything she now knew to be true. The fight was just beginning, but she was no longer a prisoner. She was a leader, a warrior. And with the humans at her side, they would take the fight to the stars. The fires of resistance ***. The command room buzzed with activity as Arina stood in front of the large holographic display, her eyes scanning the projected map of the galaxy. It had been a week since their narrow escape from the Vaxian forces on Earth, and now they were stationed aboard the flagship Indomitable, a massive human vessel that was not just a military powerhouse but a symbol of the resistance growing across the stars. Arina felt the weight of the mission pressing on her. It was no longer just about her survival. She wasn't just a fugitive anymore. She was part of something much larger, a force that could challenge the Vaxians, their merciless empire, and all the others who threatened her people. But it wouldn't be easy. The Vaxians were powerful and they had vast resources. It would take everything she had, and more, to stand against them. "Commander Renfield, what's the status of our fleet?" Arina asked, her voice steady as she turned to the officer standing beside her. Renfield stood at attention, his hands clasped behind his back. "We've got 5 ships on standby, including the Indomitable. We've secured our position in the outer rim, but we're vulnerable. If the Vaxians find out where we are, it could be the end of us. We need to hit them hard, hit them fast." Arina nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. "What do we know about their next move?" Renfield tapped a few buttons on the console, and the holographic display flickered to life, showing the Vaxian fleet's current locations. The red blips that represented their ships were clustered in multiple systems. But one thing stood out, an area marked in dark blue. "The Vaxians have concentrated their forces around the planet Sora," Renfield explained. "It's a strategic world for them. It's heavily fortified, and it's where their main manufacturing hubs for warships are located." Arina felt a chill run down her spine. Sora was important, not just to the Vaxians but to her. It had been a Zivrian stronghold before they were driven out, a place where she had spent years training with the best of their soldiers, learning their tactics and strategies. If the Vaxians had control of Tsora, they could easily build the fleets needed to crush any remaining resistance. They can't hold it forever, Arina said, her voice tightening. We hit them at Tsora. We take the planet? Renfield looked at her with a raised brow. Are you sure? It's one of their most heavily defended worlds. We'd be outnumbered, outgunned? Arina's expression hardened. I don't care about numbers. We've already done the impossible once. This is our chance to strike them where it hurts. We need to cripple their shipyards, destroy their manufacturing capability, take out the heart of their fleet. There was a brief pause as the others in the room absorbed her words. Some exchanged uncertain glances, while others seemed to have been inspired by her determination. Captain Daniels, who had been quiet up until now, stepped forward. She's right, he said, his voice firm. The Vaxians are expecting us to hide, to run. They think they've got the advantage. It's time we flip that script. Arina looked back at the hologram. We need a precise strike. We can't afford to waste time or resources. We'll need every ship we've got, every weapon at our disposal. We'll hit Tsora's shipyards at once, disrupt their defenses and leave them crippled. We don't stop until their fleet is in disarray. Agreed, Renfield said, his voice resolute. We'll need all the intel we can get on their ground defenses. And we'll need a solid plan for getting our troops in and out without taking unnecessary casualties. Arina turned to Sergeant Hayes, who had been standing at the edge of the room. Hayes, always pragmatic, nodded. I'll coordinate with the strike teams. We'll figure out the best approach for infiltration. We'll have to move fast. Good, Arina said. And I'll take charge of the attack on their shipyards. I know how they think. I know their tactics. I can predict their next move, and that will give us the edge. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Arina and the crew of the Indomitable worked tirelessly, gathering intel, organizing their forces and preparing their weapons. The urgency of the mission was clear to everyone aboard. They were about to face a battle that could either turn the tide of the war or crush their hopes once and for all. Arina spent most of her time in the strategy room with Renfield and the other officers, going over every detail of their plan. Tsora was heavily defended, its atmosphere toxic to humans, and its surface covered with Vaxian fortifications. They would need to strike quickly and decisively, bypassing most of the planet's outer defenses before launching a ground assault on the shipyards themselves. Time was the enemy, they couldn't afford a prolonged engagement. The moment of the attack came without warning. The Indomitable emerged from its hidden position in the outer rim and made a quick, unexpected jump into Tsora's orbit. The Vaxians didn't have time to prepare. Within minutes, they had launched their assault on the shipyards, with waves of human fighters tearing through the Vaxian defenses. As the human ships engaged in a dogfight above Tsora, Arina and the Special Forces teams prepared to make their move. She stood in the hangar bay, the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she donned her tactical armor, a suit reinforced with alien technology she had learned to master. She wasn't just a soldier today, she was the vanguard, leading this mission into the heart of enemy territory. We're ready, Sergeant Hayes said, locking the door behind her as the final team members filed in. Arina nodded. Let's make history. The transport ship shot down toward the surface, dodging flares of energy blasts and Vaxian fire as it descended through the burning atmosphere. Arina's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. The Vaxians had made a grave mistake underestimating her, underestimating humanity. They had no idea what they were about to face. The transport slammed into the ground with a deafening thud, its rear hatch opening to reveal a fortified compound. Without a moment's hesitation, Arina leaped into action, leading her team forward as they stormed the defenses. The air was thick with smoke and chaos, the ground shaking with the impact of bombs and artillery. Move, move! Daniels yelled as he pushed forward with his squad, leading the way to the heart of the shipyard's control center. Arina's violet energy pulsed beneath her skin, and she felt it surge to the surface as her hands crackled with power. She released it in a concentrated burst, tearing through a wall of enemy soldiers as if they were paper. The Vaxians crumpled, unable to react in time. Keep pushing. Hayes shouted. We've got this. They made their way through the chaos, with every corner revealing another victory. The Vaxians were retreating, their once impenetrable defenses collapsing under the human onslaught. Arina reached the control center, the heart of the shipyards. With one last push, she shattered the reinforced doors and entered, her heart pounding as she saw the control room full of Vaxian officers, frantically trying to organize a counterattack. Your empire is finished, she said coldly as she advanced, her energy crackling in the air around her. As the last of the Vaxians were subdued, Arina took a moment to look out the large windows of the control room, watching the destruction unfold. The Vaxian fleet was in disarray, their manufacturing capabilities crippled. The war had just shifted in humanity's favor. And with it, Arina knew one thing for certain: the fight for the future had only just begun. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.